photography. I am a wedding and portrait photographer in the Charlotte area, but I'm also a full-time middle school teacher. So I started this YouTube channel not long ago to try to help provide photography education content at a level that most people can understand. I know there's a lot of very technical education out there. There's a lot of YouTube content out there, but I am trying to gear mine towards the new photographer, the young photographer, or anybody else, 8 to 88, basically, like the Legos, to help you understand different things about photography. So in my very first video, I talked about the exposure triangle, aperture, shutter speed, and ISO. And I had a couple of friends comment that they would like to see something about lenses and understanding the different lenses. So that's what this particular video, Ebony and Christina, this is for you and for anybody else out there who's trying to understand different lenses and figure out which lenses you need to buy. So a couple of things about lenses before I show you some different things. You have to understand the aperture on a lens, because if you purchase just a basic camera kit, the lenses that you're going to get with a kit may be decent lenses for starters, but they may not be the types of lenses that you're after if you are looking for a really nice portrait lens. For example, if you look at the side of a lens, it'll say F something. This one says f1.4, meaning I can get my aperture all the way down to f1.4, which is very, very focused, very, very blurry in the background. This is a great portrait lens, but if you have one that starts at like f4 or f5.6, that could be a very decent lens, especially for landscape photography or just candid photography. But if you're really looking for portrait quality, you want to make sure that your aperture can go lower. The majority of my lenses, I've got 1.4, 1.8, 2.8, so that I can get really, really focused and sort of blur out the background in my portraits. So it just depends on the type of lens that you are looking for. There's another understanding that you've got to have about the different types of lenses, and that's understanding what's the difference between fixed and zoom lenses. Fixed lenses do not move. Your feet are your zoom when you are using a fixed lens. So this is a 50 millimeter lens, and when I have it on, I can't zoom in or out. It is fixed. It is staying at the same exact spot. So in order for me to get closer up or further away, I have to physically back up. And there's nothing wrong with that. This is actually the first lens that I purchased, my first fixed lens, and I was so proud of it when I got it because it did allow me to really amp up my portraits and take that aperture lower so that are more wide open. The numbers always confuse people. When it's f1.4, it's very wide open, but the numbers are lower. So just gotta keep that in mind. You may want to go back and watch the video I recorded prior to this one on understanding the exposure triangle and understand a little bit more about aperture if that stuff doesn't make sense. So I'm just going to tell you a little bit about some of the different lenses, including my lens journey and why I opted to purchase these over the years. Lenses can get very expensive. So you want to make sure that if you are on a budget or just starting out, that you buy what's going to work best, what's going to be the most versatile for you. And then eventually you build up your collection, I guess. That's kind of how I did it. I've been doing this now for officially in business for a little over 11 years, but I've been investing in lenses probably for the last 15. And it's taken me a while, but I feel like finally I'm at the point where I have all the lenses that I really like and use for my portraits and my weddings and all of that. Now I'm just going to have to upgrade to mirrorless lenses because I got a new mirrorless camera, which is a whole different story. We'll get into that later. So the first lens I'm going to tell you about is 50 millimeter. I mentioned this just a second ago. The 50 millimeter lens is about as close as what the naked eye sees. So when you put a 50 millimeter on your camera and then look at the back or look through your little viewfinder, you're going to see mainly what your eyes would see. This was the very first different lens that I purchased that wasn't part of a kit, and it was great. I was so excited when I got it. It does require you to move around a little bit because it is fixed, but it is a great first portrait lens for people who are looking at getting into some more portrait photography and creating some beautiful portraits for people. Another lens that you might like is a 35 millimeter. So as opposed to the 50 millimeter, the 50 millimeter is more, what the naked eye sees. The 35 is a little wider. So these are fantastic lenses I use them a lot for wedding parties where there's a lot of people, for big venue shots or ceremony photos at weddings. 35 millimeters are great for that. They're also good for portraits, but you have to physically get a little closer to your subject because it is a more wide open lens. If you don't want to physically get too close to your clients, you might opt for an 85. An 85 millimeter lens allows you to stand a little further back, but it's zoomed in further on your client. So this is one that I hear a lot of people raving about. Personally, it's not my favorite lens, but it does make really beautiful portraits. It's a little closer up than the 50 millimeter, and allows you to stand back a little bit. But it does create really beautiful bokeh. Lenses, the higher the millimeter number, the more potential for the background to be blurred. So an 85 millimeter is going to give you more blur than a 35 millimeter or a 50 millimeter, depending on what aperture you have it set at. Another fixed lens that I own is my 105 millimeter. This is a micro lens, which allows me to get detail shots. I purchased this because I was struggling to get close enough to like my rings and keep things in focus. I love this for details. It allows me, because it's 145, it's a little more zoomed in, so I don't have to be physically on top of my rings or on top of other details in order to get a pretty decent shot. The one thing you do have to remember though is, because it's very, very zoomed in, if you keep it at a very low aperture, this one only goes down to 2.8, but if you keep it at a 2.8, sometimes certain parts of the subject are not as in focus. So I may get the prong of a ring or the main diamond of a ring, but everything else behind it, even including the band, may be a little bit blurry. So when I use this, I try to keep my aperture around f8 if possible, so that I can keep, my details crisp, but everything else behind that is very blurry. So this is a great lens. You can also use this for portraits. It's 105 millimeters, so it's a little more zoomed in. So you would back up from your subject, and it creates that really beautiful bokeh in the back. I really love this one for details as well. Now, the next three lenses I'm going to share with you about are zoom lenses. They're not fixed, so they do move in and out. This one is one of my favorites to help when I'm shooting weddings, and it's a 24-70, and as you can see, it does move in and out. So at 24 millimeters, it's a pretty wide shot. So this is a great lens. If I'm photographing a ceremony, I can, get the whole entire area or the whole entire reception view in that particular, viewfinder. Or I can zoom in a little bit and get all the way up to 70 millimeters, which is a little more close up. To get even further, this is another one of my very favorite lenses. This is a 70 to 200 millimeter, and I love this for ceremonies, for wedding ceremonies, so that I don't have to get up in people's faces. I am not a photographer that wants to disrupt the ceremony, so I don't want to be the person that's all up in your face with a camera while you're exchanging your vows. Those moments are sacred. So this allows me to stand back and zoom in and get those, ring exchange or vow exchange shots. when people are pouring the sand or tying the rope or lighting the candles, I can get close enough with the lens, but I'm physically further back in the ceremony space, so I don't have to be all up in your grill. So that is the 70 to 200 millimeter lens. The last lens that I want to share with you is not one I use very often. This is a very wide angle zoom lens. It's 10 millimeter to 24 millimeter. So it is really wide open. This is a really good one if you are a landscape photographer or even like a real estate photographer. I actually bought this to do real estate with. I have a few friends who are realtors and they wanted me to shoot some of their properties for them. And I needed a lens before I had my 35 millimeter. I needed a lens that would be able to, I could step back and capture an entire room. And this does that. The only issue with this, because it's very wide, it distorts the corners. So if you have people in your images, or objects in the corners of the photos, the top four corners, they will be distorted. They will be kind of stretched out. And so that's one thing to be aware of when you are shooting with zoomy lenses, especially ones that go lower than 50 millimeters. You're going to start stretching out the edges. If you're zooming in past 50 millimeter, what it does is it compresses everything, which also can create a little distortion, but that's what creates that pretty bokeh in the background, and also can be very flattering for people's figures. If you want to like make somebody not look so wide and pointy, you can kind of smoosh them down with a zoom lens or a further out, 85 millimeter, 105 millimeter. Those are some options for lenses. So a couple of things before I show you some particular images taken at these different level lenses that you do need to understand is about a filter. So when you purchase a lens, the first thing you need to purchase with your lens before you even use it, I would suggest, is get a filter. These are just little pieces of glass that screw onto the front of your lens, and it protects your lens. Without a filter, you can kind of see the glass of the lens is exposed, and if you were to drop this, you could shatter it. This also helps to keep the lens clean. You can clean the filter very easily with some lens cleaner, and then the inside of your lens, the curve of the lens, that's sometimes a little more difficult to clean. It's easier to clean, easier to keep clean. So filters are important. You can also get polarizing filters. I do have one of those for if I'm out and it's really harsh, bright lighting and you don't want to overexpose things. You can get a polarizing filter, which kind of stops down a little bit of that light so that it's kind of like sunglasses, so that you don't have so much glare coming in on your subject. But the majority, they're just like 10 or 15 bucks, and they just go on the front. They just screw right on the front of your lens. Another set of filters that I have found very helpful are these magnifying filters. You can buy a little pack of them for like, I don't know, 10, 20 bucks on Amazon. That's where I got these. And what they do is they can turn a not micro lens into a micro lens. So I bought these to fit on my 50 millimeter lens before I got my 105 millimeter, because I wanted to take good pictures of details. And this just was, it was harder for me to get close up and get a focused image. I had to be right on top of my subject, but then it would struggle to focus. So these little guys will just screw on the front of your lens, and we'll zoom it in. Like this one, it zooms up ×4. And then this one zooms, I think they go all the way up to 10. This one goes up to 10. This one is ×1. So that really wouldn't do much at all. I don't use these often anymore. And then this one is ×2. So this just allows your lens to be able to zoom in closer without physically getting closer, so that you can focus a little bit better. So if you don't have the budget to buy a 105 millimeter lens, you can buy these for 10 or 20 bucks. I know a lot of wedding photographers who use these primarily for details. They don't have a detail lens, but I do love my 105 millimeter. So those are some things about lenses that I wanted to share with you. And now what I'm going to do is share with you some images that I took last night of my friend Maria. She stood in one place and I stood in the same exact spot, and I just switched out my lenses so that you could kind of get a visual of how the different lenses zoom in on the subject depending on where you're standing. So let me share those with you. Okay, so I'm going to share with you some of the images that I took with different lenses and at some different focal lengths so that you can see the difference. This is my friend Maria. She is the daughter of a good friend of mine, Christy, who I've been close friends with since college. And I took some family photos for them last night on their property, and I just asked Maria if she would model for me. She's always such a good sport about that. Since my own 2 children are terrible sports at modeling, I have 2 little boys, and they do not like it when I pull out my camera. But these are some different images, and I'm going to share with you some of the different shots that I took at different focal lengths so that you understand kind of how they look and how they work. So I'm going to start here with the first one. Let me zoom out at 100%, or zoom out so you can see the picture in the frame here. So this is a picture that I took of Maria at 50 millimeters. So I was standing a little distance from her, and this is literally what I saw out of my eyes, and then I looked in my viewfinder and it was pretty much the same thing. Then I changed my lens to 35 millimeter, and as you can see, it's a more wide shot. So you see more of the trees and the yard and less of Maria. Then I put on my 85 millimeter lens, and you can see kind of how it zoomed in a little bit. It's a little more blurred in the background, so you get that nice bokeh. I put on my 105 millimeter fixed lens, and you can see I got a little even closer to her. Physically, I was standing at the same distance, but the lens is what was bringing me closer to her. This is my 10 millimeter. I put on the wide angle 10 to 24 millimeter lens, and this is the only lens that does not work very nicely with my new mirrorless camera. It has a hard time focusing. But this is at 10 millimeters, so you can see it's a very wide portrait. And if you zoom way in on her, she's not really greatly focused because of the lens and the distortion. She's very soft in that particular image. That's why I don't shoot portraits with that particular lens anyway. Then I put on my 24 to 70 millimeter, and this is at 24 millimeters, so still nice wide shot, but she's definitely crisp and focused there. And then I zoomed in all the way to 70 millimeter, and you can see that is at 70 millimeters. So you can go from here to here with that particular lens, zooming all the way in and out. After that, I put on my 70 to 200. So at this end, I ended at 70 on this particular lens and began at 70 on this particular lens. So they're very similar because it's the same focal length from her. But this particular lens, you can zoom way in. So this is 70 millimeter. This one is 116 millimeter. This one I went into 135 millimeter. Not very much difference between those two, but then this one I zoomed all the way in to 200 millimeter. And I was standing at the same distance from her between this picture and this picture. But it was the focal length of the lenses that was allowing me to get closer or get further away. I used my 70 to 200 like crazy during COVID because I could stand fairly far away from my subject and zoom all the way in and not have to get all up in their faces. I could stay a good 6 feet away. So that helped me. I used it so much, in fact, that it died and I had to buy a new one last October. So that just tells you that's the only lens I've ever had to replace is my 70 to 200 because I used the crap out of that lens. It's awesome. So I hope that those things helped you with your understanding of different lenses. Please like this video if you enjoyed it. Subscribe to my channel for future photography education content. And if you have a suggestion of something you would like to see me try to explain and teach about in the future, drop me a comment and let me know. Have a great one.